The conservatory was the kind of place where rich people came to feel cultured. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that had been painted by artists whose names nobody could pronounce anymore. The floors were marble, polished so bright you could see your reflection in them. And every single night, after the last wealthy patron had gone home and the last famous musician had packed up their instrument, a woman named Santos came in with her mop and bucket to make it all shine again. Had been cleaning the conservatory for 12 years. She knew every corner of that building better than the people who owned it. She knew which bathroom stall always got clogged. She knew which windows let in drafts during winter. She knew exactly how many steps it took to walk from the main entrance to the grand concert hall, 347. She had counted them many times while pushing her heavy cart. Nobody at the conservatory knew her name. To them, she was just the cleaning lady, the one who emptied their trash cans and scrubbed their toilets and wiped down the fancy leather seats where they sat to watch performances that cost more than her monthly rent. They walked past her like she was part of the furniture. Sometimes they didn't even move out of her way. She had learned to make herself small, to press against the wall when someone important was coming through. Never complained. This job paid better than her last 3 jobs combined. It had health insurance. It let her work nights so she could be home when her daughter got back from school. Speaking of her daughter, that was the tricky part. Was 7 years old and had nobody to leave her with at night. Her husband had left before was even born. Her mother lived in another country. Her neighbors worked night shifts too. So every evening, packed a small bag with homework, snacks, and a flashlight, and brought her along to the conservatory. The security guard at the back entrance, an older man named Mr. Thomas, always looked the other way. He understood. He had raised 3 kids on his own after his wife passed. Life was hard. You did what you had to do. Never caused any trouble. She would find a seat in the back row of the concert hall, the very last row where the shadows were thickest, and she would sit there quietly while her mother worked. She did her homework under the dim glow of her flashlight. She ate her cheese sandwiches without making crumbs. She was so quiet, so still, that sometimes even her mother forgot she was there, but was always watching. The conservatory was a school during the day, one of the most famous music schools in the country. Only the best students got in. Only the richest families could afford it. But at night, there were often rehearsals. Sometimes a visiting pianist would come to practice before a big concert. Sometimes a master teacher would stay late to work with a struggling student. Watched all of it. She watched the way the piano students sat on the bench, their backs straight as rulers. She watched their hands hover over the keys before they began, like birds about to land. She watched their fingers move, sometimes slow and gentle, sometimes fast and fierce. She watched their faces change when they played, how they closed their eyes and tilted their heads like they were listening to something nobody else could hear. She didn't understand what she was seeing. She didn't know the names of the pieces they played or the techniques they used, but something about it pulled at her. Something about those black and white keys, about the sounds that came out of that big wooden box, made her heart beat faster. One night when was 7 years and 3 months old, something changed. Her mother had gone upstairs to clean the bathrooms on the 3rd floor. The concert hall was empty and dark, except for the single spotlight that always stayed on above the stage. It shone down on the piano like a beam from heaven, making the instrument glow. Had seen that piano hundreds of times. A grand, her mother had told her once, worth more than their apartment. Worth more than 10 apartments. She was never, ever supposed to touch it. Her mother had made that very clear. If anything happened to that piano, they would both be out on the street. But that night, feet seemed to move on their own. She climbed down from her seat in the back row. She walked down the long aisle between the velvet seats, her sneakers silent on the carpet. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage. And then she was standing in front of the piano, so close she could see her own reflection in its shiny black surface. Her heart was pounding so loud she thought someone might hear it. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it was wrong, but her hand reached out anyway like it belonged to someone else, and she pressed down on one key. Middle C. She didn't know that's what it was called. She just knew it was in the middle. The sound filled the empty hall. It bounced off the walls and the ceiling and the empty seats. It hung in the air like something alive. Felt tears spring to her eyes, and she didn't know why. She pressed another key, then another. Random notes, no melody, no pattern, just sounds. But each one felt like a discovery, like finding a door to a room she never knew existed. She sat down on the bench. It was cold and smooth under her legs. She put both hands on the keys, not pressing, just resting them there. She looked at her small brown fingers against the white keys and thought they looked like they belonged there. She pressed down again, this time with both hands. The sound was messy and loud and wrong. It was not music, it was just noise. But too, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. She didn't know how long she sat there. 5 minutes maybe more. She just kept pressing keys, listening to each sound, feeling the vibrations travel up through her fingers and into her arms and all the way to her chest. Then she heard footsteps. She jumped off the bench so fast she nearly fell. Her heart was in her throat. She thought it was her mother, and for one terrible second she imagined them packing their things and leaving, her mother losing her job, all because of her. But it wasn't her mother. Mr. Thomas stood at the edge of the stage, his flashlight pointed at the floor. His face was hidden in shadow, but could see his shoulders, and they were shaking. She was about to cry. She was about to beg him not to tell. But then she heard a sound that confused her. He was laughing, softly, gently, but definitely laughing. He stepped closer, and now she could see his face. His eyes were wet, but he was smiling. "My wife used to play," he said quietly. "Every night after dinner, same piano, different place. She's been gone 11 years now." Didn't know what to say. She was still scared. She was still sure she was in trouble. Mr. Thomas looked at the piano, then back at her. "Go on back to your seat now," he said. "Your mama will be down soon." Nodded and started to walk away. "Hey," he called out, and she froze. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "I'll make sure the coast is clear." Looked at him, not understanding. He smiled again, a sad and warm smile that made her think of her grandfather, the one she only knew from photos. "Everyone deserves a chance to find their music," he said. "Now go on, our secret." Ran back to her seat, her heart still pounding but in a different way now. She pulled her knees to her chest and stared at the piano under its spotlight. She had pressed one key, just one key. But somehow she knew her whole life had just changed. Mr. Thomas kept his word. Every night after that, he would walk past the concert hall exactly 15 minutes after went upstairs. He would shine his flashlight twice through the window of the door, a signal that meant the coast was clear, and would slip out of her seat in the back row and make her way to the piano. At first, she had no idea what she was doing. She would press keys at random, trying to remember the sounds she had heard the real students make. She would hold her hands the way she had seen them hold theirs, fingers curved like she was holding invisible eggs. But the sounds that came out were nothing like music. They were clumsy and scattered, like a bird trying to fly with broken wings. But didn't give up. She couldn't. Something had woken up inside her that night she pressed that first key, and it refused to go back to sleep. The first thing she needed to figure out was which keys made which sounds. She spent weeks just learning that. She would press one key, listen to the sound, then try to find a higher sound, a lower sound. She learned that the keys on the left were deep and rumbling like thunder. The keys on the right were bright and sharp like bells. The ones in the middle were warm and round like a voice speaking gently. She didn't know the names of the notes. She didn't know anything about scales or chords or any of the words real musicians used. She just knew sounds, and slowly, painfully, she started to remember them. During the day, went to school like any other kid. Elementary was overcrowded and underfunded. the kind of school where the textbooks were 10 years old and the ceiling tiles had brown stains from leaks that never got fixed. There used to be a music program, her teacher told them once. There used to be a room full of instruments and a choir and even a small orchestra. But that was before the budget cuts. Now the music room was used for storage, filled with broken desks and old computers that nobody knew how to throw away. Never told anyone at school about the piano. She never told anyone about her nights at the conservatory. It was her secret, hers and Mr. Thomas's, and she guarded it like treasure. But she found ways to learn. The school library had a few books about music, old and dusty and ignored by everyone else. Checked them out one by one. She learned that the white keys had letter names, A through G, repeating over and over. She learned that the black keys were called sharps and flats. She learned that written music looked like a secret code, with dots and lines and symbols she couldn't understand. She would stare at those symbols for hours, trying to make sense of them. It was like trying to read a language from another planet. Then she discovered something that changed everything. Her mother had an old phone, cracked and slow, that she only used for emergencies. Sometimes, when was too tired to stay awake, she would let borrow it to play simple games. But didn't play games. She searched for piano videos instead. The internet was slow and the screen was small, but it was enough. She found videos of people teaching beginners how to play. She found videos of famous pianists performing pieces she had heard at the conservatory. She would watch the same video 20 times, 30 times, studying the way the hands moved, pausing and rewinding until she had memorized every detail. Then at night, she would try to copy what she had seen. Her progress was painfully slow. What took the conservatory students days to learn took months. She had no teacher to correct her mistakes. She had no one to tell her when she was holding her wrists wrong or pressing too hard or using the wrong fingers. She had to figure everything out on her own. Her fingers started to hurt. At first it was just soreness, the kind you get from using muscles you've never used before. But then it got worse. The tips of her fingers cracked and bled. She would wrap them in Band-Aids and keep playing. When the Band-Aids fell off, she would wrap them in tape. When she ran out of tape, she played with bleeding fingers, leaving tiny red smears on the white keys that she carefully wiped away before she left. She never complained. She never thought about stopping. One night, about 6 months after she started, something magical happened. She was trying to play a simple melody she had heard in one of her videos, a piece called Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. She had been working on it for weeks, and every time she tried, her fingers would stumble and the notes would come out wrong. But that night, for the first time, she played it all the way through without a single mistake. The sound echoed through the empty hall. It was simple, just a children's song, nothing that would impress anyone. But too, it felt like she had climbed a mountain. She sat there on the bench, her hands trembling, and she cried. Not sad tears, happy tears. The kind of tears that come when you finally do something you weren't sure you could do. From the back of the hall, she heard a soft sound, clapping. Mr. Thomas was standing in the shadows, applauding quietly. Wiped her eyes, embarrassed. That was real pretty, he said. My wife would have loved that. After that night, practiced with a new kind of fire. She moved on from children's songs to harder pieces. She found sheet music in the trash cans of the practice rooms, pages that students had thrown away because they were done with them or had made too many mistakes, smoothed out the wrinkles and studied the notes until she could hear them in her head. She learned to read music the hard way, by matching the dots on the page to the keys on the piano, one note at a time. It was like solving a puzzle with 1,000 pieces and no picture on the box. But piece by piece, note by note, it started to make sense. 3 years passed. Turned 10. Her hands grew bigger, her fingers longer. She could reach keys that used to be too far apart. Her playing grew stronger and more sure. She learned pieces by and. She didn't know much about these men. only that they had written music that made her chest ache and her eyes sting. She played their notes in the dark, alone on that stage, and she felt connected to something bigger than herself, something that had existed for hundreds of years and would exist for hundreds more. Her mother never found out, was always too tired, too busy, too worried about making ends meet to notice that her daughter had fallen in love with the piano, felt guilty about the secret, but she was scared. Scared that her mother would make her stop, scared that they would get in trouble, scared that this beautiful thing she had found would be taken away. So she stayed quiet. She did her homework in the back row like always. She ate her cheese sandwiches without making crumbs, and when her mother went upstairs, she crept to the piano and poured her whole heart into the keys. Mr. Thomas watched over her like a guardian angel. He would warn her when someone was coming. He would cover for her if she lost track of time. Once, when a security supervisor made a surprise visit, he created a distraction so could slip back to her seat unseen. "Why do you help me?" she asked him one night. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph, worn soft at the edges. It showed a woman sitting at a piano, her hands frozen mid-motion, her face lit up with joy. "Her name was Grace," he said. "She taught piano lessons out of our living room for 30 years. Kids from the neighborhood, kids who couldn't afford fancy schools. She always said music wasn't just for rich folks. She said it belonged to anyone brave enough to reach for it." He put the photograph back in his pocket. "She's been gone a long time now, but when I see you play, I see her, and I think maybe this is my way of keeping her alive." Didn't know what to say, so she did the only thing she could think of. She turned back to the piano and played the most beautiful piece she knew, just for him and for the wife he still loved. When she finished, Mr. Thomas was wiping his eyes. "She would have been proud of you," he said. "I know I am." Smiled, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But she had no idea that everything was about to change. That in just a few more years, she would step out of the shadows and into a spotlight that the whole world would see. And it would all start with a single piece of paper pinned to a bulletin board. Was 15 years old when she saw the flyer. It was pinned to the bulletin board outside the main office, the kind of board she usually walked past without looking. But that night, something caught her eye. A golden border, fancy lettering, words that made her stop in her tracks. The Young Artists Competition, open auditions, first prize, a full scholarship to the conservatory's summer intensive program, plus a solo performance at the annual gala concert. Read those words 3 times to make sure she understood them. Open auditions. That meant anyone could try out, not just the students who already went to the conservatory, not just the kids with famous teachers and expensive lessons. Anyone. Her heart started beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. For 8 years she had played in secret. 8 years of late nights and sore fingers and teaching herself from thrown-away sheet music. 8 years of hiding in the shadows, watching other people live the life she dreamed about. And now here was a door, a real door, standing wide open. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell Mr. Thomas. She was too scared to say the words out loud, like speaking them might make the whole thing disappear. Instead, she prepared in silence. The audition was in 3 weeks. Practiced every minute she could steal. She practiced during lunch breaks at school, her fingers moving silently on the cafeteria table while other kids laughed and talked around her. She practiced in her head on the bus ride home, hearing the notes even when there was no piano in front of her. And every night, after her mother went upstairs, she practiced for real until her arms ached and her eyes burned from exhaustion. She chose her piece carefully. Moonlight Sonata, first movement. It was the piece that had made her fall in love with piano in the first place. She had heard a visiting musician play it when she was 9 years old, hiding in her usual seat in the back row. The music had been so sad and so beautiful that she had cried without making a sound. She had been working on that piece for 2 years. She knew every note by heart, but knowing the notes wasn't enough. She had to make the judges feel something. She had to make them understand what the music meant to her. The night before the audition, couldn't sleep. She lay in her small bed in their small apartment, staring at the ceiling, her stomach twisted in knots. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the judges laughed at her? What if her mother found out and got angry? But underneath the fear there was something else, something stronger. Hope. The morning of the audition, woke up early and put on the nicest clothes she had. A white blouse her mother had bought her for church. A dark skirt from the thrift store that was a little too big but looked okay with a belt. Black shoes that pinched her toes because she had them months ago but couldn't ask for new ones. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the bathroom sink. She didn't look like the conservatory students. She didn't have their perfect hair or their expensive clothes or their easy confidence. She looked like exactly what she was, a poor girl with a big dream. But she went anyway. The conservatory looked different during the day. Brighter, busier, full of people who belonged there. Walked through the front entrance for the first time in her life, her heart pounding with every step. The waiting room for the auditions was packed. There must have been 50 kids there, maybe more. They sat in chairs along the walls or stood in small groups, talking and laughing like they had known each other forever. And maybe they had. These were the children of doctors and lawyers and business executives. Kids who had been taking lessons since before they could read. Kids who spent their summers at music camps in Europe and their weekends at recitals and competitions. Found an empty chair in the corner and sat down. She kept her eyes on the floor. She tried to make herself invisible, the way she had learned to do all those years in the back row. But people noticed her anyway. She could feel their eyes on her. She could hear the whispers. "Who is that? Do you know her? I've never seen her before. Look at her shoes." One girl, tall and with a violin case at her feet, leaned over to her friend and said something that made them both laugh. Couldn't hear the words, but she knew they were about her. She gripped the edge of her chair and told herself to breathe. The auditions were running behind schedule. Each student was given 10 minutes to perform. Watched them go in one by one, confident and polished, and come out looking satisfied with themselves. She listened to the muffled sounds of their music through the heavy doors and tried not to compare herself to them. Hours passed, the room slowly emptied. Finally, a woman with a clipboard called her name. Stood up on shaky legs, she walked to the door, she stepped inside. The audition room was actually the small recital hall, a space she had seen many times but never entered. It had high ceilings and wood-paneled walls and about 100 seats, most of them empty. At a long table near the front sat 3 judges. Recognized one of them immediately. The famous conductor. She had seen his picture in the newspapers that got thrown away in the recycling bins. He was known for being harsh and demanding, the kind of teacher who could make grown adults cry with a single word. He looked bored, his chin resting on his hand, his eyes half closed like he had already seen everything worth seeing. The other 2 judges were a woman with silver hair and glasses, and a younger man in a suit who was writing something on a notepad. None of them smiled at her. Walked to the piano, a different piano than the one she practiced on, smaller and not as grand, but still beautiful. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. "Name?" the woman with silver hair asked. "Santos." "School?" "Elementary, I mean middle school now." The judges exchanged glances. The younger man flipped through his papers. "I don't see your application," he said. "Which teacher referred you?" His mouth went dry. "I don't have a teacher, I taught myself." More glances. The younger man frowned. The woman's eyebrows went up. Only didn't react. He just watched her with those tired, heavy eyes. "You may begin whenever you're ready," the woman said. Her voice was polite but cool, the kind of voice you use when you've already made up your mind about someone. Turned to face the piano, she looked at the keys. She took a deep breath. And then something strange happened. All the fear went away. She thought about her mother, pushing that heavy cart through empty hallways night after night. She thought about Mr. Thomas and his wife Grace, and the photograph he carried in his pocket. She thought about all those hours in the dark, all those bleeding fingers, all those nights when she played for no one but the empty seats. She thought about what it meant to want something so badly you would do anything to get it. She placed her fingers on the keys. And she played. The first note of Moonlight Sonata floated into the air like a sigh. Soft, sad, full of longing. Didn't think about technique or posture or any of the things the books had taught her. She just let herself feel the music the way she had always felt it, deep in her bones, deep in her heart. She played for her mother who worked so hard and never complained. She played for Mr. Thomas who had believed in her when no one else knew she existed. She played for every kid who had ever been told they weren't good enough, weren't rich enough, weren't the right kind of person to have dreams. She played for 8 years of silence. The room disappeared. The judges disappeared. There was nothing but the piano and the music pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. When the last note faded, she sat very still. Her hands were trembling. Her eyes were wet. Slowly, she turned to look at the judges. The woman with silver hair had taken off her glasses. She was pressing her fingers to her eyes. The younger man had stopped writing. His mouth was slightly open and was sitting up straight in his chair. His eyes were wide open now, fixed on like he was seeing her for the first time, like he was seeing something he hadn't seen in a very long time. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then leaned forward. "Where," he said slowly, "did you learn to play like that?" Swallowed hard. "In the concert hall at night while my mother cleaned." Another long silence. Then did something that made the other 2 judges gasp. He smiled. "We will be in touch, Miss Santos," he said, "very soon." Walked out of that room on legs that didn't feel like her own. She didn't know what was going to happen next. She didn't know if she had done well or made a fool of herself. But she knew one thing for certain. She had finally stepped out of the shadows. And there was no going back. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Was at school when the mail came, so her mother opened it. Didn't usually opens mail, but this envelope looked official. It had the conservatory logo in the corner, golden and shiny, and's first thought was that something was wrong, that somehow the school had found out about coming to work with her, that they were both in trouble. Her hands were shaking as she tore open the envelope. She read the letter 3 times before she understood what it said. When came home from school that afternoon, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in front of her, tears streaming down her face. His heart dropped. This was it, they knew. They were going to fire her mother, it was all her fault. But then looked up and saw that she wasn't crying sad tears. She was smiling. "You won," whispered. "First place, full scholarship, my baby, you won." Couldn't move, she couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense. First place. Out of 47 students from the best families in the city, students with private teachers and years of professional training, and she had won. Her mother stood up and pulled her into a hug, so tight it hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" asked, her voice breaking. "All this time, why didn't you tell me?" Started crying too. 8 years of secrets came pouring out. The late nights at the piano, Mr. Thomas watching over her, the videos on the cracked phone, the bleeding fingers and the thrown-away sheet music and the dreams she had been too scared to speak out loud. Held her daughter and cried and laughed and cried some more. "I'm not mad," she said. "I could never be mad. I'm so proud of you, so proud." For one beautiful night, everything was perfect. But the next morning, everything fell apart. It started with phone calls. The conservatory director called at work and told her to come to his office immediately. When she arrived, there were two other people in the room, a lawyer in an expensive suit, and a woman had never seen before, with cold eyes and a tight smile. The woman was the mother of the girl who had come in second place, a girl from one of the wealthiest families in the city, a girl who had been taking lessons since she was 4 years old with teachers who charged $300 an hour. And she was furious. "This is a disgrace," the woman said, not even looking at. "An absolute disgrace. That girl had no business being in that competition. She's not a student here. She has no formal training. She probably can't even read music properly." "Ma'am," the director began, but the woman cut him off. "My daughter has worked her entire life for this. She's performed at Carnegie Hall. She's been featured in magazines. And you're telling me she lost to some cleaning lady's daughter who snuck in off the street?" Sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face showed nothing, but inside she was shaking. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the situation and there are some serious concerns. The girl apparently practiced on conservatory property without permission, after hours, for years. That's trespassing. That's unauthorized use of expensive equipment, and frankly, it raises questions about the integrity of the competition itself." The director looked uncomfortable. He was a small man with glasses and a nervous habit of touching his tie. "The competition rules state that it's open to anyone. There's nothing that says participants need formal training." "Then change the rules," the woman snapped. "And in the meantime, I want that scholarship revoked. I want that girl banned from the premises, and I want this woman fired." She pointed at when she said that last part, like was nothing, like she was garbage to be thrown away. Finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. "My daughter didn't do anything wrong. She just wanted to learn. She just wanted to play." The woman laughed. It was not a nice laugh. "She wanted to play. There are plenty of community centers for that. This is the conservatory. This is not a place for people like you." The meeting ended without a decision. The director said he would need to review the situation. The lawyer said there might need to be an investigation. The woman said she would be making calls to the board of trustees. Walked home in a daze. When got back from school, she found her mother sitting in the dark, still in her work uniform, staring at the wall. "Mama, what happened?" Told her everything. The meeting, the lawyer, the angry woman, the threat to take away the scholarship, the threat to fire her. Felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. "This is my fault," she said. I'm so sorry, I never should have." Don't you dare apologize, you didn't do anything wrong, you hear me, nothing." But her voice was hollow. And that night, for the first time could remember, she heard her mother crying through the thin walls of their apartment. The next few days were the worst of life. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She went to school and sat through her classes without hearing a word. All she could think about was her mother losing her job. Her mother, who had worked so hard for so long, who had sacrificed everything so could have a better life. And for what? For a stupid dream. A stupid, selfish dream. She decided she would give it up. She would go to the conservatory and tell them she didn't want the scholarship. She would tell them to give it to the other girl, the one with the rich mother and the famous teachers. She would do whatever it took to make this go away. She was putting on her coat to leave when there was a knock at the door. Opened it and froze. Was standing in the hallway. The famous conductor, the man who had smiled at her after her audition. He was wearing a long black coat and carrying a leather briefcase, and he looked completely out of place in their shabby building with its flickering lights and peeling wallpaper. "Miss Santos," he said, "may I come in?" Couldn't speak. She just stepped aside and let him enter. Came out of the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. When she saw who it was, her mouth fell open. Looked around the small apartment, at the worn furniture and the water stains on the ceiling and the photographs on the wall of as a baby. His face showed no judgment, only something that looked like understanding. "I grew up in a place like this," he said quietly. "Smaller, actually, and colder. In Russia, winter is not kind to poor families." He turned to face them both. "I have spoken with the board of trustees, I have spoken with the director, and I have spoken with some old friends who owe me favors." He paused. "The complaint has been dismissed, the scholarship stands, and Mrs. Santos, your job is secure." Let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Still couldn't speak. She didn't understand. Why would this famous man, this important man, go to so much trouble for them? Seemed to read her mind. "When I was 10 years old," he said, "I found a broken accordion in a trash bin. I taught myself to play it in a freezing apartment while my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us alive. No teachers, no lessons, just hunger and stubbornness and a love for music that would not let me go." He looked at with eyes that had seen a lifetime of struggle and triumph. "I know what it is to want something so badly that you would bleed for it. I know what it is to be told you don't belong, and I know what it is to prove them wrong." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "This is your invitation to perform at the gala concert. First place winner, solo performance. The whole city will be watching." He handed it to. "Do not let them break you. Do not let them silence you. You have earned this. Now go show them what a cleaning lady's daughter can do." He shook his hand. He nodded too, and then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint smell of cologne and the echo of his words. Looked at the envelope in her hands. Her name was printed on the front in elegant gold letters. Her mother put an arm around her shoulders. "Well," said, her voice thick with tears but also with something that sounded like pride, "I guess we need to find you something to wear." Laughed. It was a wet, shaky laugh, but it was real. The storm had passed, and now it was time to step into the spotlight. One last time, she thought, one last chance. And she was not going to waste it. The night of the gala concert arrived faster than expected. She stood backstage, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the concert hall filling up with people. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns that sparkled under the chandeliers. Important people, rich people, the kind of people who had never looked twice at her mother pushing a cleaning cart through these same halls. Tonight they would all be looking at her. Smoothed down her dress for the 100th time. It was simple compared to what the other performers were wearing. Navy blue, borrowed from a neighbor who was about the same size. Her mother had stayed up late the night before, adjusting the hem and adding a little lace to the sleeves to make it look more special. It wasn't fancy, but when had looked in the mirror that morning, she had felt beautiful for the first time in her life. Her mother was somewhere out there in the audience, 3rd row, center section. The conservatory had given them 2 free tickets and had used the other one for Mr. Thomas, had insisted. Without him, none of this would have happened. He deserved to be there. She peeked through the curtain again and found them. Her mother was wearing her best dress, the one she only wore to church on Easter Sunday. Her hair was done up nice, and she was sitting up straight and tall like she belonged in that velvet seat just as much as anyone else. Mr. Thomas sat beside her in a suit that looked about 30 years old but was clean and pressed. He was looking around the concert hall with wide eyes, like he couldn't believe he was really there. Felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. Not yet. She couldn't cry yet. The program had 6 performers. Was last. She didn't know if that was an honor or a punishment. All she knew was that she had to sit backstage and listen to 5 other students play before it was her turn. 5 students with years of training and famous teachers and parents who could afford to give them every advantage in the world. The first performer was a boy with a violin. He played something fast and complicated, his bow flying across the strings. The audience applauded loudly when he finished. The second was a girl at the piano. She played a piece by Chopin, technical and precise, every note exactly where it should be. More applause. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Each one was brilliant. each one made feel smaller and more afraid. What was she doing here? She didn't belong with these people. She was just a girl who had taught herself to play on a piano she wasn't supposed to touch. She was fooling herself. She was fooling everyone. Her hands started to shake. Her breath came fast and shallow. She felt like she might be sick. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned around and found standing behind her. He was dressed in a formal black suit, his silver hair combed back, his face calm and serious. "You are afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. Nodded, she couldn't trust her voice. Looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "When I was young, before my first big performance, my mother told me something I have never forgotten. She said, 'The piano does not care if you are rich or poor. It does not care if you have a famous teacher or no teacher at all. It only knows if you love it. And if you love it, it will love you back.'" He put both hands on her shoulders and looked into her eyes. "You love the piano. I saw it the moment you played for me. That is something no amount of money can buy. That is something no teacher can create. It is either there or it is not. And in you, it burns like a fire." He stepped back. "Now go out there and let them see it." A stagehand appeared at side. "Miss Santos, you're on." Took a deep breath, then another. She thought about her mother in the audience. She thought about Mr. Thomas and his wife Grace and the photograph he still carried in his pocket. She thought about all those nights alone on the stage, playing for no one but the empty seats. She walked out into the light. The concert hall looked different from this side, bigger, brighter. The faces in the audience were just shadows beyond the glare of the spotlight, but she could feel their eyes on her. Hundreds of them, watching, waiting, judging. She walked to the piano, the same she had played for 8 years, the same bench, the same keys. But everything was different now. Walked to a microphone at the side of the stage. The audience fell silent. "Ladies and," he said, his deep voice filling the hall. "I have conducted orchestras on 6 continents. I have heard 10,000 pianists in my lifetime, prodigies, virtuosos, some of the greatest musicians of our generation." He paused. The silence was absolute. "But I have never heard anyone play with the hunger that this young woman possesses. She did not learn piano to win competitions. She did not learn to impress her parents or her teachers. She learned because she had no choice, because the music was already inside her and it demanded to be let out." He turned to look at. She taught herself, alone, in the dark, on a piano she was never supposed to touch. While her mother cleaned these very halls, this girl was falling in love with music, and tonight you will hear the result. He stepped back from the microphone. "Ladies and Miss Santos." The applause was polite but uncertain. Could feel the doubt in the room. She could feel the whispers, the raised eyebrows, the skepticism. She didn't care. She sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes. And in that moment, she was not on a stage in front of 500 strangers. She was in the empty concert hall at midnight. She was 9 years old again, pressing that first key, hearing that first note ring out into the darkness. She began to play. The opening notes of Moonlight Sonata floated into the air like ghosts, soft, haunting, full of a sadness so deep it seemed to come from somewhere beyond the music itself. Played the way she had always played, not thinking about technique, not worrying about mistakes, just feeling the music move through her like blood, like breath, like something essential and unstoppable. She played for her mother, who had worked so hard and given up so much. She played for Mr. Thomas, who had kept her secret and believed in her when no one else knew she existed. She played for every kid who had ever been told they weren't good enough, weren't smart enough, weren't the right kind of person to have dreams. She played for the little girl who had pressed one key and felt her whole life change. The music built and swelled and broke like waves against the shore. It whispered and cried and sang. It filled every corner of the concert hall, every heart, every soul. When she finally played the last note, she let it fade into silence. Her hands trembled on the keys. Her eyes were wet with tears she didn't remember crying. For one terrible second, there was no sound at all. Then the audience exploded. People leaped to their feet. The applause was like thunder, like a storm, like something alive and powerful that shook the walls and rattled the chandeliers. Looked up, blinking in the bright lights, and saw 500 people standing and clapping and cheering. And in the third row, center section, she saw her mother. Was on her feet like everyone else, but she wasn't just clapping. She was crying, sobbing without shame, her hands pressed to her heart, her face shining with tears and pride, and a love so fierce it seemed to light up the whole room. Beside her, Mr. Thomas was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, smiling the biggest smile had ever seen. Stood up from the piano, her legs felt weak, her whole body was shaking, but she was smiling too, smiling so wide her face hurt. She had done it. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the light. She had shown them all what a cleaning lady's daughter could do. And as the applause continued to thunder around her, made a silent promise to herself. She would never stop playing. She would never stop fighting. She would never let anyone tell her she didn't belong. Because she did belong. She had always belonged. She just had to find the courage to believe it. And it had all started with one note. One single note, played by a 7-year-old girl who didn't know anything about music except that it made her heart sing. One note that changed everything.